All right. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to City Parks Alliance's webinar, Designing Projects that Improve Community Health. I'm Dr. Selena Shirazpour, Assistant Professor at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles, California, and I'll be moderating today's discussion. I'm joined today by Jennifer Green, Director of Programs and Project Management at the City of Mobile, Alabama, and Steve Rayfus, Superintendent of the Municipality of Anchorage Parks and Recreation. Support for this webinar today was provided by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. City Parks Alliance is a national urban parks advocacy organization based in Washington, D.C., with members across the country. Its work focuses on ensuring that everyone has access to a quality park. Just this month, City Parks Alliance published a report called A Smart Investment for America's Health, the Land and Water Conservation Fund and the Outdoor Recreation Legacy Partnership. This report highlights the physical, mental, and environmental benefits that city parks provide and demonstrates how funds from the LWCF's Outdoor Recreation Legacy Partnership, or ORLP, play an important role in supporting strong, healthy communities across America. For those of you who are not familiar with the ORLP program, it is a federal urban park grant program that provides grants to cities for park projects in underserved communities. And you can find more information about the ORLP program on CPA's website. Parks are an essential community asset. Extensive research shows that parks play a critical role in making cities healthier places. They offer opportunities for outdoor activity, alleviate mental stress, and provide numerous environmental benefits. You will read in City Parks Alliance's report how close-to-home parks increase the amount of physical activity people engage in, which significantly reduces rates of obesity, type 2 diabetes, and heart disease. And residents within a short walking distance of a safe park are significantly less likely to suffer from stress, anxiety, or depression than residents further from a park. New research shows how kids with ADHD have been found to concentrate better after a walk in a park, and in fact, the effects of a walk in a park were even similar to the effects of taking common ADHD medication. The report also talks about how city parks help mitigate the effects of climate change. Extreme heat is now the #1 weather-related killer in the US, deadlier than all other weather-related causes combined. Large, shady parks can help in reducing heat by as much as 10 to 20 degrees. City parks also clean the air. In New York City, children in leafy neighborhoods are 3 times less likely to have asthma than children who live in neighborhoods with few trees. City parks also prevent flooding and clean waterways. As most of you know, low-income communities of color have historically seen less park investment than whiter, wealthier communities. The report highlights how cities across the country have used the Outdoor Recreation Legacy Partnership Program to address these inequalities. This compact report contains easy-to-use facts and statistics that can be utilized in your own advocacy efforts. Today's webinar will focus on 2 case studies from this report that received ORLP grants. Our speakers from Mobile, Alabama and Anchorage, Alaska will discuss the park and greenway projects they're working on that provide significant health benefits. They'll talk about how they've approached these projects, as well as the funding sources, engagement processes, and partnerships they've put in place to set the projects up for success. So we have a great turnout today, and to ensure we can respond to everyone as questions or technical difficulties arise, here are a few tips. To ask a question, click the questions icon on your screen, type the question in the box and click send. Feel free to send questions throughout the presentation, just know that we will be holding them until the end. If you experience a technical problem during the presentation, please type it in the question box and send it to us. And if you miss something, please don't worry. Links in today's recording, the presentations, and related resources will be emailed to everyone who registered. All right, so I'm going to stop talking and let's get started. I'm first going to hand it off to Steve in Anchorage. And Steve, you're all set to take it away.
Great, thank you. I'll just wait to bring up my screen here. Thanks, Selena. Well, greetings. My name is Steve Rayfus. I'm Superintendent of Parks from the Municipality of Anchorage, and I'm with the Parks and Recreation Department. I am here in Anchorage today. This is the traditional homelands of the Dena'ina people who've been the stewards of this land for 10,000 years. And so I feel a great responsibility and an honor to be the steward for the future generations. Today I want to talk about Anchorage. I want to talk about parks, how we work with the community to improve health outcomes, to design parks. And when I talk about health outcomes, we think not just of physical health, but also of emotional health and mental health as well. Also want to share some experiences, particularly of a project with Chauncey Muldoon Park. This is our newest park and was also the recipient of $750,000 of the Outdoor Recreational Legacy Partnership Program grant from a few years ago. So we'll talk about that and also how we leverage diverse funding sources to do more with our parks. So just a little bit of background. As you can see, Anchorage is surrounded on three sides by water. This is the Cook Inlet, and it's an extension of the Pacific Ocean. And then to the east, you see Chugach State Park, which is just under 500,000 acres. It's a true wilderness park. You have glaciers and lakes and tundra and all sorts of wildlife. And in terms of Anchorage, we're about 40% of the population of the state. So we have just under 300,000 people who live here. The area that I've highlighted is what we consider the Anchorage Bowl, where the actual municipality of Anchorage encompasses pretty much everything to the right of the water that you see. Our population, as we grow, tends to be younger and more diverse as we sort of go from the previous census period to now. And our median income is a little bit higher than the national average, but when you incorporate the higher cost of living, it really kind of washes out. Under my management and our department's management, we have 11,000 acres of land within Anchorage, 225 parks and 250 miles of trails, and we're truly a four-season city. So our multi-use greenbelt trails, which are great for biking in the summer and for transportation, we actually groom those in the winter. We'll get about 80 inches of snow every year. And so in addition to all these assets, we have indoor and outdoor recreation centers as well as pools. Our department does planning and development. I have a small team of planners and landscape architects that focus on capital development and community outreach. Our maintenance operation focuses on cutting grass in the summer and emptying trash, and in the winter we transition to maintaining ice rinks and lakes and grooming trails. We have 10 greenhouses. We produce 80,000 flowers every winter, and then in about 2 weeks we'll take those outside and start planting. As you can imagine, winter is really long here. It's dark and it's gray, and so having that pop of color really adds to just the sense of place that we have here in our short summer. We also manage natural resources, wetlands and stream banks and upland forest, as well as recreational programs. So our typical operational budget every year is about $22 million. I'm not totally sure how that compares, but if anyone's a similar size city to us and has similar assets, maybe that's a good comparable. But I think almost more importantly, we have $5 to $10 million in capital budget, capital development that we do every year, and that's a mix of federal, state, local, and philanthropic dollars. And two of the biggest benefits for us that from the federal level has been the Outdoor Recreational Legacy Partnership Grant and the Land, Water, and Conservation Fund. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when we talk about the Chauncey project. And then state grants and programs tend to ebb and flow with the amount of revenue that's at the state, which is largely dictated by the price of oil. So when oil is at $100 a barrel, it's terrible for driving around, but actually does pretty good for allowing for state capital grants. And then I'll talk about park bonds as well. We've got a park bond that's between $3.5 to $4 million. We put it out every year with our local election, and we've actually had really good success. We've passed 10 straight bonds. And then finally, I want to point out philanthropic dollars play a big role. We have the Anchorage Park Foundation, which is a great partner. They've helped invest another $20 million over the last decade in our parks and trails with support from other groups like the Rasmussen Foundation. So grants and project match and volunteer efforts have really allowed us to do more. So this is my chance to kind of share a little bit more about Anchorage, but also tie it to health. And so this is a picture of the sunset at 2:30 in the afternoon, right around the solstice. In the winter time, now that gives you an idea of how short the days are in the winter time, typically about 5 hours of daylight. But even so, it's really important to get outside every day. One, for mental health. So access to outdoor spaces, it's going to reduce anxiety, it's going to reduce depression, and it improves intention and concentration. In terms of outside and playing, we have neighborhood playgrounds, and I think something that the report highlights is providing those opportunities for close to home experiences. And in our case, it's neighborhood parks. And we have a big focus on inclusive play. So making sure that we're designing and building parks for children and adults of all ages and ability, but also focusing on some of the thematic elements that make Alaska special, whether it's beluga whales or the polar bear or even the woolly mammoth. These are all custom pieces we had designed and put into our parks. And no kid says the actual name of a park. They say, take me to the woolly mammoth park or the polar bear park. And so it really gives a sense of place, but it also helps increase physical and improve physical activity for children. It reduces obesity and other chronic diseases in the future, like heart disease and diabetes. So making sure that we have opportunities for children to get out into close to home places is really important for health. Our trail system is world-class, and again, it's 4 seasons. So a lot of the trails in the summer in which you can, do 30, 40-mile loops. In the wintertime, we're grooming those trails. And so having access to trails improves mental and physical health, but there's an equity and an environmental component to it as well. So these provide alternatives to the car. It helps reduce greenhouse gases and air quality, but also there's an equity component, and we focus on trying to build trails into underserved neighborhoods to provide additional ways to access the larger part of the community. I think foods is important here. 90% of the food that you find in the grocery stores here is coming from a barge from out of state. And so access to local healthy foods is really important. And with 11,000 acres of parkland, we provide community gardens, and we also provide farmers markets, which are great opportunities for our refugee and our immigrant communities. So low cost, locally sourced foods help reduce obesity, and also in more economically challenged communities, it provides access to those fresh fruits and vegetables. And of course, it's important to have events and programming. When you have program and events, you bring your community together. It improves mental health, physical health, and that real sense of stewardship and ownership within the community. And that's something that we focus on in all seasons. Even when it's 10 below outside, we'll still throw outdoor events and get great turnouts because everybody knows that we live where we live. Something on the health front that I want to share is we've all experienced the pandemic over the last couple of years, and I think this is one of those few things in all of our lives, no matter where you're joining us from today, that we all share an experience. But the experience is a little bit different. And we were asking ourselves here in Alaska, are people using parks and trails more? Are they using them differently? And how do people think about parks and trails and their overall quality of life now that we're all locked down and really the only thing that we can do is go out to a park or trail? And fortunately, it's a lower density city, and within about a quarter mile of everyone's home, you can find a park or trail. And I think some of the important takeaways from that were that 90% of the people who responded indicated that parks and trails improve their quality of life. They strongly agree with that statement. 2/3 of respondents use parks and trails not just for exercise, but also to improve mental health. 62% indicate that they value parks and trails more than they did before the pandemic. And a little over half of the folks indicate that they're using the parks and trails more often. And we thought we'd get 300 responses. We got close to 1,500 responses on this, which was really a big success for us and actually a model for other cities who are asking the same questions. Now, looking at this, we also think of this kind of twofold, right? Every year we put our bond out in April, and we know that there's a lot of uncertainty just about everything in the community at this time last year. And so we made sure that we were sharing these 4 boxes that you see on the right. These are actually social media posts that we put out in the weeks leading up to the bond to remind folks of the importance of these parks and trails and open spaces, and that we need to continually invest in them. And fortunately, we were able to pass the bond last year. And then earlier this month, we passed our 10th bond straight. So in the last 10 years, we've put about $30 to $40 million in park bonds, locally supported park bonds in our parks. The park bond is our main source of funding park projects, particularly improving health and trails and outdoor spaces with local dollars here at least. And this is a simple GIS story map that we put together every year. If you've never used the program, you could create something like this in a single day. And this is one of our main outreach tools for the bond. So we can show spatially where all the projects are in the community, as well as descriptions about each individual project, and then talk about the debt service. Okay, if your property value is this much, you're going to owe X amount. And there's a couple of key things I want to share. Is one, it's important to know what your community's appetite is for the bond. So, just don't go ask for $10 million. Like, understand where they're comfortable with property tax increases in relation to investment. Outreach is important, so you need to spread the word. And then when you get the funding, you've got to go out and build it. So you've got to demonstrate success. So the next year when you ask the community, they see the projects that were, the ribbon cuttings and all that, and they're going to be more excited to support these projects. And then what the map illustrates is our attempts at taking an equitable approach. So spreading the love, giving every neighborhood skin in the game, but also for analysis, you can take 5 years of these maps and overlap them, and you can see where you are investing, underinvesting, overinvesting, or maybe just not even investing at all. So this allows us to take a real equitable approach about ensuring that we're putting money into parks and communities throughout the city. So this brings us to Chance New Muldoon Park. So Chance New Muldoon Park is our newest park here in Anchorage. It was essentially dedicated in 2015. It's 24 acres. It's located in a lower income neighborhood in our most densely populated area of the city. And so what I want to share here is, we were fortunate enough to have a diverse range of funding sources, of which one of those was the ORLP grant, as well as local bonds and state funding and philanthropic dollars. But I also want to share what our process is, for folks who have a similar job as myself. How do we work with the community to develop a park from scratch, and how do we incorporate health discussion into that, and how do we fund that? And so that's something I'd like to share as we look at the park here. So Chance New Muldoon Park is a long linear park located in East Anchorage. You can see it's primarily surrounded by residential property, and then you have kind of older traditional strip mall development, which in recent years you've actually seen the property, which is mixed use, has been developed into mixed use housing. Senior housing, market rate and mixed rate, as well as first floor retail. But Muldoon Road and DeBar Road are two of the busiest arterial roads in the city. There's about 20 to 30,000 daily trips on each of those roads. So it's important to understand what the context of the park is with the surrounding area. Where you locate high intensity, community towns, sort of town center type activities is not going to be back in the residential area. It's going to be upfront. And so these are some of the considerations that we thought about when we were designing the park. So our typical process for designing a park is you always start with your history. As I mentioned earlier, these lands have been inhabited by the Dena'ina people for over 10,000 years. And it wasn't until the Alaska Railroad came to Alaska in 1915 that we started as a tent city. And even so, in 1950, there was nothing but homesteads out in this area. And so one thing I want to point out that kind of influences some of the development is the Alaska greenhouses. In the 1970s, 80s, and 90s, it was the Alaska pipeline came, and the oil was discovered, and it's huge, tremendous growth. I'd say 200, 300% statewide growth in those decades. And so with that, you had a population, still you had only the Alaska greenhouses, were the only greenhouses and nurseries in the state. And a lot of the population, as Anchorage was growing, was driving all the way out to here to come to the greenhouses. And you'd pack up the old station wagon and the family and a picnic, and you'd make a day of it. And a lot of folks still carry those fond memories of that place, and that really influenced what they wanted for the park, whether that was a community garden and food forest and orchard, or just having a space for a farmer's market. Now, in 2015, the park was dedicated, and then at that point, it became under our management, and then we started working with the community to spend some dollars and start our phases of development. So your history, then you look at the land use. So one thing that we always do is, before we even look at the park itself or the space that will become a park, is what is the community, who are we serving? And so typically we'll take an even more stepped back view of it, but one thing is we don't need to replicate things that already exist in the community. So you need to look at deficiencies as well as the needs and wants of the community. And one thing we know is that where it's marked institutional land here is a middle school that was developed in the last decade, and it has 5 hockey rinks and 10 tennis courts and 10 basketball courts. So chances are we didn't need to replicate that in the park when we were building this out and going through the visioning. Also, we need to know who we're serving here. Who is the community? So to do this, we look at census data. We go to schools and we talk to kids. We have people that live in the neighborhood, but it's important to really understand the demographics of the community, look at your population growth trends from decade to decade, because sometimes your community can change quite a bit in the matter of 10 years. Also looking at what the household income levels are in various census tracts. What are the languages that are spoken at home? I think it might be surprising to hear that Anchorage has one of the most diverse school systems in the entire nation. Not something I originally thought about when I first moved up here. Also looking at housing tenure. Do folks own their homes or do they rent their homes? And then how do folks move in and about their community? Are there green belt trails that will lead to the park? Is the park located on a main bus line? And so understanding all of these things helps understand who your community is. And then you got to go out and talk to the community. So we knew going into this process, one of the big challenges was trust with the community. It took a long time for this property to actually get turned over and dedicated to be a park. And there was previous administrations who wanted more commercial development, but the community fought hard. So we knew that going into the process, and the landscape architects and the planners that we worked with, we had a great team, and we essentially decided on the first meeting, we want the advisory group to give us a tour of the park. We'll sit there, we'll take notes, we'll listen. What are the opportunities? Where are the places that are special? What are the constraints? What are the things that people want to celebrate? And we diligently recorded that information. A week and a half later, we had another meeting and presented this graphic back to them that showed opportunities and constraints. And I think that they were really surprised. They're like, wow, our ideas are being heard. They're pretty much exactly as we said. And with that, you started to get the seeds of trust building. And it took a while, but we did a similar process, very iterative, and it allowed us to continue to build trust. And most of these people have my cell phone now. And so there's definitely a level of trust that's there. And it was a long fight, but by the end, I think everybody was really happy with the product. Then we moved to community priorities. So we engage the community, we understand opportunities and constraints, we understand the community. And now we ask through public workshops, through going to schools, through online surveys, what are the priorities that you want to see at this park? Then we take those ideas and we translate them into the physical space through design workshops and conceptual development, and ultimately arrive at a preferred alternative of the master plan, which looks like this. And there's a couple things I want to point out about this. I mean, this graphic encapsulates it all, but with this, behind this graphic is about 150 pages that outline what the process is, that outline what the community profile is, what are the desires, needs, and wants of the community, and what does implementation look like, and what are cost estimates. And the reason we do that is that I know that there'll be future opportunities through the Land Water Conservation Fund and the ORLP grant, that I know what those applications will look like because these are things that we've applied for in the past. And so I think one thing I'd recommend is what we learned is when you're documenting the process, keep in mind what these grant opportunities look like in the future. And most of that application is an 80% cut and paste exercise with a little bit of tailoring to what some of the questions that they're asking are. So we built out phase 1 and phase 2. Phase 1 on the left is located right on that busy arterial of Muldoon, and this was considered the town center that they wanted. So this is the most intensive use. You have an inclusive playground there. You have a custom picnic shelter. We have an ice skating ribbon that in the wintertime, well, in the summertime, it's actually a farmer's market and event space. And then in the wintertime, we use that same space for ice skating. Then you have trails and a creek, and essentially this is what the community wanted as their town center. And in the time since this photo was taken, there's been a coffee shop that's moved into that little corner right there. And I think a lot of additional development, particularly across the street with some senior and mixed rate housing to really support this and make this a popular destination. Further back into the park, you can see there's residential homes along there. So we didn't want to bring half of the city into the neighborhood. So more passive use, community garden and a food forest, an off-leash dog park. We built a bike park, which will open here in a couple weeks. Nature play area we're building this summer, and then still access to trails and creek and forest and uplands. And we'll take a closer look at this here in just a sec. But I think something important to look at is, no project happens without some real money. And this one got started with about $1 million, $1.5 million of state legislative grants. And then with that, we started passing park bonds as we moved along the master planning process. Had a bunch of funds in the bank, but not enough to really fulfill the vision. And then we applied for the Outdoor Recreational Legacy Partnership Grant for $750,000. We were able to overmatch the grant, which I believe made us more competitive. and has been really a big boost to the development of this park. And just talking about that grant specifically, so this is a program that was started in 2014. It's under the Land, Water, and Conservation Program, which I think dates back to the 1960s. And I think they've given out, I think, $3.8 billion in awards. But the Outdoor Recreation Legacy Partnership Grant is a grant focused mostly on urban parks and revitalization. This was in a lower income neighborhood and a previously developed property, which made us competitive. And I guess I'm hopeful in the months and years to come is that these programs, Land, Water, Conservation, and ORLP, will get boosted through the federal infrastructure package that was passed, and hopefully some additional other federal programs that will allow us to continue to invest in urban parks. Finally, I want to talk about the philanthropic dollars. We had a lot of engaged folks in the community, and our partners at the Anchorage Park Foundation helped sponsor a fundraiser. We raised $30,000 in cash. The Park Foundation had given out a $40,000 challenge grant to build the community garden, and that leveraged at least $60,000 in private donations and volunteer time. So here's a look on the ground at the park. This is Chester Creek. It's the name is Chanchnu. And in August, this section of creek here, you'll see salmon swimming right upstream. So pretty amazing to be in the middle of the city, one of the busiest areas of the entire city, and you're still seeing salmon swimming upstream. And then here's a look at the playground. So you can see inclusive playground. You can see the design of that custom net climber really takes those elements from the old greenhouses at the property. You can also see that kids in Alaska doesn't make a difference what it looks like outside. They're still going to get outside and play. And then this is two looks at more or less the same area. So you can see the farmers market in the summer, they're just getting set up for the morning. They're in the top picture, and then another angle of that same space is where we'll have ice skating in the winter. And then here's the look at the community garden and food forest. This is mostly pictures of the food forest as we've been building it over the last few years. But again, the food forest has got, I think, 40, 50 fruit-bearing trees and hundreds of shrubs, native shrubs like service berries and blueberries and ferns, cranberries, and then we also see things like rhubarb, which grow really well. And we think in about 6 or 7 years, when it really grows out and matures, that we could produce about 30 to 40,000 pounds of food. And these gates are open to the public to come and harvest. In our community garden, we'll have 50 garden beds. It's $30 for a plot. It's 10 by 20. And with that, we're building demonstration garden beds, and we're going to be hosting classes to help improve education. But as I said earlier, it's, all of the food that comes to Alaska, 90% of which is coming on a barge. It's extremely expensive. If you've ever been in a grocery store in Alaska, you'll know what I mean. So being able, in particularly low-income neighborhoods, to provide healthy local foods and access to that at an affordable price is really important. And I think that the first gardeners are going to get in for the season in about 2 weeks, and I think it's going to be a great success and definitely a boost to the neighborhood. Okay, so you can also see our youth employment and parks crew. We employ 20 teens every summer to do natural resource projects like the trail that you see, and then also the pump track that we're building, and we're going to open that here in a few weeks. And with that, I just want to share a few kind of takeaways of things that I covered, and maybe this is most relevant when we send the slides out later. But in terms of process, it's important to know who your stakeholders are, build trust, record people's ideas, and share it back to them. This is validation, and work towards consensus. Also, building broad support and delivering results. And when you do that, make sure you tell the story. And this is where social media really helps, and things like events and ribbon cuttings. Our mission statement is healthy parks, healthy people. So everything we do, every time we do a park improvement project, we ask, how will this improve health outcomes? Understanding the needs of the community, being inclusive, and also inventorying the deficiencies and facilities within your community to help know what those needs are is important. And then raising public awareness, doing programming, and supporting partners is important. And then finally, a few notes about what's made us successful in passing our bonds. Essentially, communicating, demonstrating success, being equitable, and knowing what your community's appetite is. And finally, with grants, research the grant opportunities. Even if you don't have a project ready, understand what they look like And then as you go through a process with your community, keep that grant opportunity in mind so that you're not duplicating effort, and you can transition that master plan right into a grant opportunity, and you're off and running to building your park. So with that, I just want to say thank you to everyone. I'm looking forward to the next presentation, and I'll be available for questions. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Steve. And definitely appreciate, and I'm sure everyone appreciated the depth at which you focus on understanding your community, from community profiles to priorities to almost co-designing the spaces is really wonderful. So thank you for sharing that process. We will now hear from Jennifer from Mobile, Alabama. So take it away, Jennifer.
Thank you so much. Let me just share my screen. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I just want to thank Steve for that great presentation and the City Parks Alliance for allowing us to talk about our project today. Today, I'm talking from Mobile, Alabama about a project that has been decades in the making, that is just in the beginning of execution. So it's kind of the other side of what Steve was talking about, and that's the Mobile Greenway initiative. And for those of you that don't know where in the world Mobile, Alabama is, we are on the Gulf of Mexico. We're the fourth largest city in Alabama. We have just under 200,000 citizens. It's a great place to live. We're right on Mobile Bay and right at the tip of the Mobile-Tensaw River Delta. So we have a lot of really wonderful ecological areas to explore. It's a very large area that's urban, but it's also the smallest city I've ever lived in, just because we have a lot of really great community, a lot of really great partners, a lot of really great connections, and our citizens are incredibly supportive of the work that we do in the city. So I'm really pleased to live here and pleased to do this work. Just a little bit quickly about the department that manages this project. My department, Programs and Project Management, is one of the newer departments in the city of Mobile, and it was really created to execute the transformative projects that are coming to the city of Mobile. We also manage the city's capital program. So projects that are part of my department are mostly federal grant funded projects, although there is some other funding involved in that. Currently, we manage about $100 million in federal projects, and they could be anywhere from major road construction projects, land acquisition, environmental restoration. We work really closely with our Parks Department on our real estate asset management project, where we do things like building the Africatown Welcome Center. You can see the roundabout in the bottom left corner that we just built to solve a really complex traffic issue in one of our areas. So you never know what we're going to be doing, but the Greenway project is one of the most exciting projects for me because I love connectivity. One of the things I do in my spare time is I run a community bike shop here in Mobile. And so access to recreation, and especially for bicycles, is really important to me in the community. So the Mobile Greenway initiative has been something that's been on the minds of citizens, nonprofits, and government agencies for over 35 years. I've got some things to show you here. So there was a 3 Mile Creek plan that was done in 1983. That's the earliest time that we found that people were talking about this. That was an actual plan that was done. Work has been done over many years to get to the point where we're actually executing a Greenway project for the city. You can see the picture of the people smiling on their bicycles. That's a ride that happens to support Greenway projects that the community holds every year. And one of the most important things about these Greenway projects is that in an environment that's 99% urban, a lot of our neighborhoods, parks, commercial areas have been cut off from one another. So the Greenway is really designed to link those neighborhoods, parks, and commercial districts, and also provide access to unique natural areas like 3 Mile Creek and other areas in the community. I don't have to tell you the benefits of Greenways because I know Steve already talked about them, and I know you as attendants know that things that are really important to us are the health of our community, the economy, and also the environment. One great little statistic that I love that Blue Cross Blue Shield of Alabama, which is our major health insurer, has stated is that for every $1 spent on trails and paths that we can do, we can save $3 in medical expenses. I think that's really important statistic that we have here in Alabama, because projects like this are really going to get people out and about and have a place where people can easily connect into trails and have a really great outlet to enjoy the environment and to get that much needed outdoor time that we need. We really have looked with this project to a lot of really successful projects like the Atlanta Beltline, the Swamp Rabbit Trail, Chattanooga's projects. They all really demonstrate for us that return on investment that residents, businesses, and the city gets back from implementing projects like this. So we're really focused on those things and really focused on looking at the successes and learning from those projects in our area here. One little great thing about the actual 3 Mile Creek part of the Greenway initiative is that when we complete this Greenway, it'll be within 1 mile of 70,000 residents. So we feel like that's really important. We have a lot of pocket parks here in Mobile, so neighborhood parks, so parks that you can go to that you might be able to walk to. I have one that's about a half mile from my house here in downtown Mobile, but this is going to be a linear park. So there'll be lots of access and lots of space to move, which is going to be a real game changer for the city. Just a little bit about health in our city. Unfortunately, we're not known as the healthiest city in the US nor in the state of Alabama. We do have some challenges that we have with obesity, diabetes, life expectancy. And so projects like this really contribute to people's health. We know that if you build it, they are going to come. We have 1 mile of trail built right now and it's heavily used. So we're really looking forward to executing the next step of that so we can really help people get on a path and do the exercise that they need to increase their overall health. So just one thing about partnerships. Projects like this in an urban environment cannot be done without key partnerships. The citizens are our #1 key partner in this, so the support of them is super important. We also have lots of partners that are environmental groups. We have partners across the state and across our area that really are supporting this that may not even be adjacent to the trail, but they know what the importance of it for our community. We also have great partnerships with the state, with our utilities, like our water and sewer system. This trail portion actually will be on top of an easement that our utility service has. We're not lucky like some other cities to have abandoned railways that we can build trails on. So we've really had to be creative about where we can put our trails, and working with our utility has been fantastic because they've allowed us to come in and build in the area where they also have utility in that area. The other key partnership I want to say is if you're working in a municipality, your actual city departments, so your elected officials, our mayor for the last 2 terms that he served has been amazingly supportive of these kinds of livability projects. My department is in charge of design and engineering, so more on the execution side, but the ultimate owner of the park would be our Parks and Rec department. And so they're a fantastic partner as well. And then all the other departments that help us get our job done, like our grants management, procurement, diversity office, engineering, our real estate department, they all are key to helping us get these projects off the ground. I also want to say that funding is incredibly important. In areas like ours where we don't have a lot of surplus dollars to kick into projects like this, you really have to be creative with how you get your funding. We were really lucky to have an LWCF ORLP project in 2015 that actually funded that 1st mile of trail that I spoke about. If we hadn't have been able to do that, we wouldn't have been able to demonstrate the success and what this project would actually look like on the ground. With that demonstration, we were able to secure Restore Act funding. And for those of you that aren't in the Gulf of Mexico, those are oil spill dollars. So we actually secured $12 million for the first 5 miles of the 3 Mile Creek Greenway. And that's going to connect 3 very well-used parks and reconnect communities that have been historically disconnected. So we're very excited about that. We also have a bunch of other funding that we've secured, both for actual construction dollars, design dollars, land acquisition that we've had to do. And we're always looking for new opportunities. Most recently, we put in a raised grant for a bridge, which I'll show you in a minute. That's going to be a really important connection that we have. We also will have more access to Restore Act dollars, which are going to be important. We've already put in more grant applications to fund more trail sections with that. So this is the first part that I was talking about, that 5 miles, that 3 Mile Creek Greenway trail portion. This is through a very dense residential and urban area, and this is our execution in motion right now. We are working on building the trail from the inside out. So we're working on designing sections 1 and 2, that yellow part on the left side of your screen. That is undergoing right now. But going from the right side of your screen, we're also working on designing and constructing 5, 6, and 7 at the same time. I mentioned the RAISE grant application. That center section that's in red is actually a major highway system that crosses through our city. It's Highway 65, and that's an interstate, and we will be building a pedestrian bridge to connect both sides of this. So this is a lot of work going on and a lot of complicated project management across all sections of the trail. These are just some examples of bridges that have built in other areas. This won't be a suspension bridge, but it will be a bridge across infrastructure like this. So it'll be really a gateway into the city. It will be the first thing that you come to that kind of welcomes you to the city of Mobile on Interstate 65. So we're really excited about moving forward with grant applications for that. And that's estimated to be a $25 million project. Just a little great thing that's happened in the last year, thanks to a lot of hard work during the times of COVID, we were able to secure funding through GoMesa, which is another part of oil funds that come to our state, to buy 150 acres that is going to be the first actual access to nature and bay for the city of Mobile. So this is a hugely transformative project that's on the southern side of the city and will be the next stage of implementing the Mobile Greenway initiative. There was an old golf course here at one time, and it is an absolutely beautiful view of the bay and the city, and there's just some pictures there for you. And there's also going to be 50 acres of wetland and conservation easement that are sensitive habitats in our city that we're going to be able to protect with this. This morning I was sitting through interviews for consultants to do the design and engineering, and we expect that to be awarded in early May. It's going to include intensive and inclusive community engagement. So learning from some of our past issues that we had with communities maybe not being completely supportive of trails, which we know happens across the country, we're really looking how we can do this in a new way and as best as possible to really get that important community feedback and bring the community through the entire process with the city. The trail in this area is actually going to be called the Crepe Myrtle Trail, and so this is going to be the start of that in this area. So I always say it's all about connections. In an urban environment, you can't always have off-road trails. So in the end, when the Greenway initiative is complete, it'll be 18+ miles of trails. You can see that it goes through different areas in the city. The 3 Mile Creek Greenway is actually going to be off the road, but then when we go through the city, we have really new and awesome projects for the city that include pedestrian and bike infrastructure that will take riders if they wanted to ride off-road, get on the road, take them safely through the city, and then connect down into the southern part of the Mobile Greenway initiative and those properties that I just spoke about. So thinking through connections and access points for our community is really important, challenging as well, but also fun to think through. So sometimes you have to think creatively about how to move citizens on a trail like this, especially when it's in such a dense environment, but we're really working really well with the community and our consultants to do that. One of the things that I just wanted to mention is that we have a really clear safety plan for this project. The number one community concern that we always hear is about safety, because this is new for our community. We know that this is a challenge everywhere else in the country where people try to implement these big trail projects, especially in urban environments. But we've worked really closely to take those things that we've learned and develop a really comprehensive safety plan. One of the things that we're doing is including SEPTEP principles in our design, which is really important for having a maximum safety, but also working on innovative lighting. So we're going to have solar lighting on the trail that's wrapped solar lighting, so they will be more blend into the environment, but they also will have integration into the city's fiber grid, real-time camera monitoring, so our project shields from our police department will be able to immediately see if there is a call and an issue on the trail, what's going on. And there also will be Wi-Fi connectivity all along the trail. So we're excited about this component and this innovative design that we're bidding for this project, which is out right now on the streets, getting bids back for these poles. So just in closing, I know it's always helpful to hear about the good things, but just also some of the challenges with our project that we know other people have, but working on innovative ways to calm community concerns. That's always been one of our foremost things that we want to do, is make sure citizens feel comfortable with the project and also the safety. Also working on real estate. When you have a dense urban environment, which is historic and in some places ecologically sensitive, how do we work really carefully to make sure that we get the land that we need to build the trail, but also are ecologically sensitive. Also, everybody's major challenge is finding enough funding. These projects are tens of millions of dollars in the end due to completion. So finding money for design, finding money for community engagement, and finding money for construction is always something that's going to be a challenge that you have to work creatively to get through. And then those of you that have federal grants, keeping projects moving with delays tied to funding. Some of the funding that we have for this project has very long review periods. So just working through how to communicate those delays when we have them that are related to our funding has been a challenge, and something that we've had to work really creatively to talk about, because as everybody knows, we want things built now when we put them, the word out on the street that it's happening, but sometimes the reality is that it takes a while to get them executed fully. So with that, I just want to thank you for having me. Always happy to receive any questions. Here's my contact information if you're interested in what we're doing. I'm happy to talk to anyone that's here on the call today, and just thank you so much to the City Parks Alliance for having me.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. It's such an exciting project, and to hear, I think a lot of times the physical activity, to hear that you're also focusing on so many of the contexts that are important to promote activity, like making sure it's accessible to people, that it's nearby, that it's safe, a lot of the concerns people have. And it's great to hear that in the part that's already built, you're getting such wonderful participation. So thank you. So I'm going to ask Steve to rejoin us as well, and we're going to take some questions from the audience for the remainder of our time together. We're getting a lot of questions relating to funding, and I know you both spoke about that, difficulties in finding funding, the different sources that you might use. Some might be specific to your location, some might be ones that could be shared by other people on our call today. How do you go about sourcing or identifying funding opportunities? I'm not sure if someone wants to take that first, or I'll choose someone.
I'm happy to talk about it first.
One
of the things that our city has done that's been hugely successful is we've started a grants department.
Okay.
Yep, so that's been great. So we have staff that actually helps us not only look for and understand things that we might be able to apply for, but also help staff with the application process. That's taken a huge weight off of our shoulders. A lot of us have experience in grant writing and grant execution from anything we've done previously, but we also have all this work that we have to execute on a daily basis. So having that support has been fantastic. And so that's something that if your city doesn't have, advocating for those types of positions, I think are really key, because I know it's been a huge success point for the city in helping us gain access to more funds for projects, especially like this.
Thank you. Steve, any thoughts? I think you might be on mute.
Yeah, thanks. No, I think Jennifer did a great job. I think advocating for a grants administrator within the city helps, right? You have all the resources within the city that can help compile it, but often finding the grants and then the whole process of the reporting takes a lot of time. And here at the city, we have a grants administrator, and then also at the state level, there's a grant administrator that helps with the LWCF grants and the federal grants. And so I would say, having that grants administrator is really important, but also attending, webinars such as this to learn about new opportunities for funding, following reports that the City Parks Alliance is putting out, and just kind of keeping your ear to it. And I think that's particularly critical because I imagine opportunities for funding in the next decade, there's going to be, with the passage of the infrastructure bill, lots of new opportunities. So I think folks like Jennifer and I are kind of keeping one eye on what that's going to look like and trying to jump on those opportunities when they come.
And a little nervous.
Right.
Thank you both. Next, we have a question about community engagement. And both of you spoke about some of the challenges you faced with community engagement, either in terms of some historical concerns that communities might have in terms of trusting the city, or otherwise just on the basis of different cultures and preferences and differences in how you see space being used. I was wondering if maybe you could speak about some of the challenges you faced and how you overcome them. And maybe pass it over to start with Jennifer again, if you don't mind.
Sure, no problem. Like I said in my presentation, I think sometimes in the community there's a fear about these projects. You might be bringing, I'll just tell you something I heard in one of our feedback sessions, bringing criminals to their back door via a trail. One of the things that we know is listening to people is so important, making sure people feel heard, understanding the process, and then that feedback loop. So communicating back about the project. I think we've learned over the years about how to do it better and better and better with community engagement. I think the city has done a really good job looking forward and how we can include the community, more and more and more. Like I said, this is such a dense urban environment that we're working in, and there are communities that have not been connected previously. So I think it makes sense that people would have those concerns, and it's hard to, when you can't see it executed and you're just thinking about how it would be. So continuing to build it, I think, is going to be one of those things that also is going to allay community concerns, but also listening to that and addressing it. So our safety plan, for example, has gotten much, much more complex. We've really put a lot of funding into making these really sophisticated ways to be able to monitor what's going on. And so I think moving forward, just learning from our mistakes, successes, and then what other people are doing for projects like our Berkeley by the Bay project, I think we're going to get even better and better as we keep going about working with the community and bringing them along with us as our #1 stakeholder, because as I always like to say, we work for the citizens of Mobile, and so we want to make sure they feel comfortable and happy with what we're doing.
Yeah, and then, sorry, Steve, before I pass it over to you, just on that point, Jennifer, we did have a question about residents, like if it was the first major greenway or bikeway in Mobile, and if residents were reluctant. And I know you said people were taking up that first bit, but was there initial reluctance to use the first bit that was being built?
So I don't think so. The first section, the 1 mile that we built with our LWCF funds that we had, was 1 mile, but it was a spur off a pretty major sized park that was very well used. So it was just like, oh, okay, this is part of the park. But as we started talking about continuing to build off that spur and keeping going and, hearing miles of trails and things like that, I think that's where the community started being like, wait a minute, that's a lot more. And some people have never been to a place like the Atlanta Beltline or Greenville to see the Swamp Rabbit Trail and ride on that and be like, wow, this is amazing. So I think being able to show people, what it looks like, and then as we continue to build, I do think that there is general broad acceptance for things like this, especially as people continue to travel and see other things. A lot of major southern cities have these amenities, and it's the reason why people want to live there. And so we want to be like them. And so that's one of the major impetus for knowing that it's going to be successful. So if we build it, we know people are going to come and use it and enjoy it and support it.
Thank you, Jennifer. And then Steve, pass it to you. I know community engagement was a focus of your projects as well.
Sure. I think one thing I'd add to Jennifer's comment and her community's concerns, this is when we've built these trails out in our city, it was exactly the same thing. A lot of reluctance. Oh, it's going to be crime and this and that. And then now you look after 10 years, 20 years, you look at Zillow and everyone's like only 1 block away from the trail, located right on the trail. It's the best asset that they're highlighting. And so I think what it is It takes a little time for the community to warm up to it. I find that sharing precedent from other cities where it's been successful, and particularly other cities that are similar to Anchorage, and this is maybe where Jennifer might find success, is other southern cities look, similar type layout, similar type culture, and it's successful here, it's working, and our city can have this too. And I think another note in terms of working with the community is we have a community council system, so every neighborhood here is organized into the community council, and then it's recognized by the charter as a way to essentially participate. And so we always start with going to the community council to introduce a project, and then we typically will form an advisory group from the community council and from the different stakeholders, the soccer and the softball organizations, to participate in a park improvement planning project. And that way, when we are making decisions and going through the process, they report back to the community council or their users, and they can get feedback and bring it back to the table. And so it's iterative, but also it allows for two-way participation. And then when you can, find a champion, find someone who is from the community and supports and understands the project. And if you can, lean on them to be the voice, because no matter what, sometimes people are just going to look at me as the guy from the city, and why should I trust you? But I think if you can find your advocates and your champions within the community, they can really help you carry a message and a project forward.
And one other thing I'll say to that, Selena, and I think Steve is totally right on, and I wish we had that system, your community system in our community. I think that's amazing. I think sometimes we have to acknowledge, especially in deeply conservative areas like we live here, that they don't necessarily want to hear what's working in other communities. You may not always convince. I can have all the data in the world. I'm a scientist by training. I can have all the safety data I want. I can have I can have people come and speak from other communities. And sometimes you're still not going to convince people that it's going to be safe. And so, that slow, continual communication about what we're doing, we think is always going to be key to make people feel comfortable as we move forward. So.
Sounds good. Thank you both. I know we have a lot of great questions that are starting to come in, and I feel bad because fortunately we have run out of time. So due to time, that was our last question. But just a reminder that links for today's recording, the presentations, and the new health report from City Parks Alliance will be emailed to all the registrants within 2 business days. First off, I would just really like to thank Jennifer and Steve for joining us today for their excellent presentations and for this conversation on these really incredibly exciting projects. I feel like I've added 2 cities to my bucket list to visit and check them out. City Parks Alliance hopes that everyone who's attended today can use this information and the health report to advocate for additional funds for your parks on the local level. If you would like a hard copy of our report, please email Julie Waterman, and we'll put her email address in the chat. And if you have additional questions for the speakers, I know there were some specifics in there about mapping or certain funds, please feel free to reach out to them directly at the emails that you see here on the screen. And please also take a minute to fill out the short evaluation that will pop up after the session concludes. City Parks Alliance anticipates that the National Park Service will open the next ORLP application round sometime in late spring. CPA will notify its members and will host 2 webinars with National Park Service staff, 1 overview and 1 technical assistance session where Park Service staff will walk through the application. Also, please be sure to mark your calendars for City Parks Alliance's Greater and Greener Conference taking place in person in Philadelphia from June 18th to 21st, 2022. We're all very excited to be able to connect in person. There are some amazing speakers and sessions planned. Registration is open and you can explore the conference tracks and get the latest information at greatergreener.org. CPA will also be hosting ORLP sessions at the conference in case you want to discuss in person. All webinars are listed on our website at cityparksalliance.org under the Events tab. Please check there for future webinars and registration information. And if you're a member, you'll also find our full webinar archive so you can view all past webinar recordings. And access to all webinars is just one of the many resources available to City Parks Alliance members. We also offer workshops, park study tours, information on federal grant opportunities, a resource library, discounts on our Greater and Greener conference, and much more. If you're interested in becoming a CPA member, please visit cityparksalliance.org/join. And last but not least, thank you to all of you for joining us today. We really appreciate it, and we enjoyed and appreciate your excellent questions. Keep up the great work that you're doing in our nation's urban parks. Thank you very much, everyone, and have a wonderful afternoon.